Hello, James Wilson here from the Research on Research Institute in London and University College London as well. Thanks ever so much for the invitation opportunity to offer a few words of solidarity and support to the Metascience Meetup that's taking place this weekend in Tokyo. It's fantastic. I wish I was there in person to be with you, but it's fantastic to see the scale and enthusiasm with which a growing community within the Japanese research system is embracing and advancing metascience in various ways. And we in Rory are happy and excited to support your efforts in whatever way we can. So it's great to have a chance to just say a few words. My thanks to Noel and to Ray for the invitation to do this. They asked me just to say a little bit about where metascience is at internationally. I'm sure many of you are already very engaged and involved in these discussions, but let me offer just a few minutes of thoughts that hopefully can help to stimulate and engage with some of the other themes you'll be talking about over these 2 days. I have been visiting Japan on and off, I suppose now for 20, 21, 22 years, a long time, in various science policy capacities, various points in my career. My last visit to Kyoto and Tokyo was in 2024. This is a couple of the talks I gave there, including this one on Are We All Meta Scientists Now, which I gave at Grips. But during that visit, one of the things that was most exciting for me was encountering and meeting with various colleagues within the Japanese system, within academia, within some of the funding agencies, government, and other bits of the system who were collaborating, talking, exchanging ideas around metascience and how metascience within Japan could be strengthened and supported. And it was really exciting for me to meet some of you and to hear about all of that. My understanding is there's around 120 or so people at the meetup this weekend, and that you're coming from a whole range of sectors, which again is brilliant and reflects the kind of dynamics we're seeing in metascience elsewhere around the world, as I'll say in a second. To my mind, the whole idea of a Metascience Meetup is a bit reminiscent of the kind of way in which science itself was conducted and began back in the beginning of sort of certainly modern Western science in the UK and other countries, through these groupings of what were then called natural philosophers who'd come together in each other's houses in an informal way and conduct experiments, exchange ideas, debate science as it wasn't by then even known in its earliest form. And this, in Britain at least, gave rise to the Royal Society, the National Academy, where I in fact worked for several years, obviously much later than the 17th century. I'm not that old. But the idea written about here by Steve Shapin, the Harvard historian of science, of a house of experiment is one that always evoked in me a lot of thought when I worked at the Royal Society, the idea that this academy had begun as a house of experiment. And I think we can see in a way that, metascience and metascience meetups are a house of experiments. They're a site of experimentation for the future of science policy, science funding, the organisation of the science system itself. So I see some parallels in these different movements. Some of you I know were with us, Noel included, at the Metascience 2025 conference, which we were privileged to host at UCL in the summer of last year, end of June. And that was a fantastic meeting. It was a huge meeting. We organised it expecting to draw a larger crowd than we had at previous conferences in this series. These conferences began at Stanford University in 2019, and they've taken place every 2 years. By 2023, the meeting was held at the US National Academies of Science and had about 270 people, and it was becoming more international. But when we organised the 2025 meeting, we ended up with over 800 participants from 65 countries, including a good show of colleagues from Japan, which was great. And that reflects, something that's shifted, something that's changed in Metascience, who sees themselves as part of Metascience. I used this slide at the start of that conference to say to all of the people there, we are Metascience. The diversity of countries, the diversity of sectors. Here a slide to show that in the audience. Still a lot of academics, a lot of researchers, but growing numbers of colleagues from foundations, charities, government funding agencies, tech companies, government policymakers, NGOs, publishers, infrastructure providers. This ecosystem of who is involved in Metascience has become much richer, more diverse, more dynamic in all sorts of ways. And I think that's something that we should welcome very much as a positive development. We had at the conference in London some big keynotes from various people. This is the UK's Science Minister, Lord Vallance, who gave in our system the first ever ministerial keynote speech about Metascience, and he published various strategy documents on Metascience in the UK system, including this one that we had written as a sort of supporting piece looking at the past, present and future of UK Metascience. And that's the best articulation from Rory, from the Research on Research Institute, of how we understand Metascience as a movement. But we also had some fantastic speakers from elsewhere. Here, of course, Takahiro Wayama, who spoke very eloquently about these debates within the Japanese system, and spoke also about some of the emerging priorities for the 7th STI basic plan, which he is, of course, centrally involved in producing, and which I understand will be published in the next couple of weeks. So we're looking forward to see what meta-scientific elements may be in that plan in terms of the future shape and strategy of policy in Japan. At the conference, we also launched this new Metascience Alliance, which is a loose coalition of organisations from different sectors who really just share in common the fact that they are involved in, they're committed to, they're trying to build Metascience. So it's still quite it's early days for this as an initiative, but we are very keen to try and do more to strengthen the connections and the collaboration between different parts of this big, rich ecosystem. Here's a Nature editorial as well that talked about this. And here's a few of the organisations that signed up in that first round. But of course, the alliance is open and will very much welcome more supporting organisations, including, of course, from within the Japanese system. I asked when I was last in Tokyo, as I say, I spoke at GRIPS, and I this was the title of my talk: "Are we all meta-scientists now?" And I won't talk a lot now about definitions and terms and words and phrases. In some countries, certainly now in Britain, meta-science has become the sort of term of art that's being used to describe this busy, diverse, dynamic field. But of course, there are many other terms, there are many other ways of talking about this, many of which are very old. I mean, this is not all new. We always have to resist anyone who tells you this is a new thing. Meta-research, science of science, research on research, science policy. These are all different ways of getting into the same core set of questions. But meta-science, I think, is becoming, in a range of places, not just Britain, probably the most widely used, at least, term. And there are lots of definitions which I won't go into. I mean, the way I describe, in a simple way, what is meta-science, I say, it is the science of science itself, as a simple sort of explanation you can give to someone, at the bus stop or whatever. If we want to be a bit more theoretical about meta-science, this is one of the most interesting papers that's been published in recent years about meta-science as a movement by David Peterson, Aaron Panofsky. And this paper came out of the first Metascience conference in 2019. And those of you that have read it will know this, but this diagram comes from that paper, and they talk about meta-science as a convergence point between three different communities which have sort of academic dimensions and other more activist or policy dimensions as well. So you've got the open science strand, you've got the methodological activists, the science reformers, people from reproducibility movement, etc. And you've got the science of science wing, if you like, people who are more driven by concerns over the efficiency, the effectiveness of science systems, return on investment, making science more agile, more dynamic, all of these things. And Metascience, in a sense, is a big tent that can bring all of those together and more. I mean, we would argue in the paper I showed you from Rory, we would say that, yes, it's all of these things and it's more as well, which I will just touch on. I was very struck by Riichi Maruyama's nice diagram that he did after Metascience 2025, his reflections on the conference. And I mean, flattering that he put Rory at the middle of it all, but I don't think that's necessarily justified. But nonetheless, another interesting way of thinking about these different quadrants: Metascience for competitiveness, Metascience entrepreneurs for productive science, reforming science through cultural shifts, Metascience entrepreneurs for systemic change. So, there are different ways of trying to organise what this thing is and who's involved and why and what they're trying to achieve. But I don't think we should get too hung up on precise definitions, precise categories. I mean, I am very much of the big tent persuasion. I think, if people are interested and they want to be involved, welcome them in, embrace that diversity and see how we can all work together. And there are, of course, also important critical voices saying Metascience is a bit of a waste of time, or it's a bit superficial, or it's not critical enough in its analysis. And that's also an important critique to engage with. I don't agree necessarily, but I don't. I welcome the challenge that's being posed, particularly from fields like science technology studies, or at least from some in those fields. So, it's become a quite lively point of debate across all of these fields. As I say, it's not new. We always have to remind everyone about the history. I have on my shelf behind me there somewhere a copy of this volume on the science of science, which in British metascience terms is probably the first significant metascience book, although one could also talk about J.D. Bernal even earlier. But this is a collection from 1964. So as we said in our paper in the conference last year, another important way of making sense of metascience is to stress that metascience has deep roots historically and in different disciplines, many branches. There are many different forms, traditions, methodological, theoretical strands to this thing. We as metascientists, if we want to call ourselves metascientists, shouldn't ignore that heritage. There's a critique from some of Columbusing existing fields, like Christopher Columbus. You go onto a territory and you claim it as new and sort of virgin land, when in fact, of course, it's already inhabited. So that's one thing we have to be conscious of. At the same time, we need to avoid the equal fallacy, in my view, of pretending that nothing here is new. There's lots that's new. Methodologically, there's a huge amount of innovation and advance on an almost weekly basis in metascience, and it makes it an incredibly exciting field. So it isn't entirely new, nor is it entirely old. Some of you who've heard me speak will have seen me use this diagram, which is a visualization. I won't go into the detail because of time here now, but it's a way of making sense of what metascience is across the academic landscape. You see different clusters. In the red there are the disciplines that we perhaps would traditionally associate with this kind of work, the social sciences that work in science policy, scientometrics, higher education studies, economics of innovation. But what makes metascience exciting is this incredible spread of work that's being published, that's being done across all sorts of fields of science. And this is largely researchers in their field who are choosing to devote time and energy and effort to meta-scientific questions alongside their main area of work. They're doing this, I sometimes say they're doing it as a side hustle, alongside their main work. This is an example of 4 side hustlers who are publishing metascience alongside their main research. I don't think it's helpful to think of metascience as a discipline. I don't think it is a discipline. I think it's more of an orientation. It's a way of engaging with science and research. And anyone can do it. And you might choose to do it part-time. You might do it on a Wednesday afternoon when you've finished your experiments in the lab. You might do it for a period in your career and then go back to doing other things. One doesn't have to self-identify as a meta-scientist to do meta-science. I mean, I'm wearing a t-shirt that I put on for the purposes of this video from the conference that says I'm a meta-scientist. I mean, I would, if someone said, what are you? I would say, now I'm a meta-scientist. But, most people doing meta-science are not calling themselves meta-scientists. They're doing it as a side hobby. There's lots of ways in which the field's changing. I'm going to run out of time, so I'll just quickly skip through. Lower barriers to entry. We can use methods. We can access database. We've got things like Open Alex that allow people to do work. And of course, you've got a whole wave of exciting new AI-based tools that are transforming these fields very, very quickly. And that's the bottom-up piece. Then top-down, we're also seeing more and more governments investing strategically in these capabilities in their national system. And these are just a few examples. Canada, that's the European Union, the green thing there. The one there is a conference that took place in Shanghai, sort of from within the Science of Science movement in China. France, Germany, Ireland. We're seeing lots of initiatives bubbling up and more on their way. And of course, in Japan, it's been great to see the energy and the sort of focus that you as a movement, as it were, have been directing towards meta-science now manifesting itself in the formal system within Japan, starting to give more prominence and recognition to meta-science. So this is obviously the consultation phase of the 7th STI Basic Plan, and as I say, we hope there'll be and the references, I don't read Japanese, but I'm reliably informed that on page 17 is the bit that talks about meta-science. But there will be, we hope, of course, further substantive commitments and commentary on meta-science in the plan when it emerges. What else is happening? We're seeing big tech getting involved. I work in London, just down the road from where Google DeepMind is based. They have a team of people doing meta-science and thinking about ways in which AI is changing the science system. That's an example of their work. We have new institutions being set up in certain places. So these are institutions that aren't studying science in a meta-science. They're in a sense trying to embody the spirit of meta-science by doing science differently. And it's it's very interesting to sort of look at these as one response to all of this. And we've got a wave of meta-science philanthropy that's coming particularly from the US, but also from some other countries as well. Coefficient giving used to be called open philanthropy. They co-invested in the UK with the government in a series of meta-science grants. Schmidt Sciences, I was just talking to today. This is linked to Eric Schmidt, of Google fame. They have this Centre for Science Systems, which is basically a meta-science initiative, etc., etc. There's a whole lot going on in the philanthropic arena. My good friend Stian Westlake, who runs one of the research funding councils in Britain, draws a distinction between what he calls Apollonian and Dionysian meta-science. Now, I don't know how up you are in your Greek myths, but by this we mean, the Apollonian branch is building in a logical, ordered way evidence to support meta-science. The Dionysian branch is much more playful, disruptive, and potentially destructive in its approach to doing science in new ways, and potentially tearing science down and trying to rebuild it from the grassroots. Sort of, at the extreme end, the Dionysian branch is the sort of Elon Musk Doge project, sort of destroying the federal system and putting something else in its place. Now, both of those are important dynamics in meta-science. And I think, ideally one wants a more integrated and sort of synthetic model of meta-science that can build and embrace the creative energy, the sort of disruptive power of the Dionysian branch, and marry it also to the more systematic, programmatic, evidence-driven approach of the Apollonian branch. But you can tell me how that dynamic manifests itself in Japan. There are also examples, of course, of these agendas being used and co-opted and taken in other directions. I won't dwell on the US situation, but you can, for yourself, look at how some of the agendas of the science reform movement, the Metascience movement in the US, have been adopted and co-opted by different agendas in the current US administration. Japan, of course, you don't need me to talk to you about the Japanese system, but the same pressures that drive all of this meta-scientific activity in Britain, in America, and in other parts of Europe are there, very present within the Japanese system. Lots of attempts to tackle those in different ways. Of course, a very long tradition in Japan of really high quality analysis, evidence building that relates to these questions, in science policy, things like NISTEP and other GRIPS itself. So, all of these different programs. Long before the Metascience Unit was set up in Britain, I would always point to Japan as one of the countries. When I was trying to tell the British government to do more, I would say, "Well, look at what Japan's doing. They're doing a lot. We should do more." So there's a lot already in place, a lot to build on. But my hope, my advice, my entreaty to all of you is that metascience is its strongest when we embrace that diversity. We see metascience as I would describe it as a discourse coalition. It brings together lots of different framings of the problem and lots of different routes to solutions. It's inclusive, it's global, and it's a source of collective intelligence for science systems around the world and for funders and for policymakers. I'll just end on this quick note. We are now doing in Rory this project called Meta Moment, which builds very much on what happened at the conference and the energy and the diversity of participants that we saw, and is trying very rapidly to map developments at a national system level in metascience across several countries, including Japan. So we're really excited to be working with some of you on that, and I hope to be in Tokyo again in October this year, or late September, October, and potentially participating in some conversations and workshops around this. But we're going to try and analyse the landscape, look at what's happening. There'll be a report coming out in November that draws some of this together and looks at different countries, including, as I say, the Japanese system. So, to end, as I say, we are Metascience, you are Metascience. It's an exciting time to be doing Metascience. It's great that there are meetups happening in Tokyo and elsewhere. It's great that there's this level of interest and enthusiasm. My email there, I'm pointing at it. Drop me a line. I'm always keen to hear from colleagues and allies, friends who are working on this in any part of any system. In Rory, our job is just to try and knit this together, to build it, to make it stronger. But I'm delighted that you're meeting. I wish you a really good meeting, and good luck. And let's make this a fantastic Metascience 2026 in the Japanese system and beyond. Thank you very much.